In today's episode, I'll talk about two interesting stories. In the first story of the day, I'll talk about how weight loss drugs have finally entered India and what all of this means for us. And in the second story of the day, I'll talk about the production linked incentive or the PLI scheme by the government and how it has performed over the years now. Welcome to the Daily Brief Show by Zerodha, where our aim is to cut through the noise and simplify the biggest news and stories in the financial markets in a way that is easy for you to understand, yet one level deeper as compared to your traditional news channels. I'm your host Anurag Bansal, and today is Monday, the 24th of March. After about 1.5 years of hype around weight loss drugs, they have now finally entered India. A company called Eli Lilly has introduced a drug called Mounjaro, which uses a chemical known as trizepatide. Now, this trizepatide is very similar to semaglutide, which is the key ingredient in the much talked about Ozempic, but some people say it might be even more effective in helping with weight loss. Now, at the moment, single-dose vials of Mounjaro cost around 3,500 rupees each for the 2.5 mg version and about 4,375 rupees for each of the 5 mg dose. And because a person usually has to take at least one dose a week, this amount can add up to over 2 lakh rupees a year if you are on a moderate dose of 5 mg. Now that of course is a lot of money, but it's just the beginning, to be honest. Novo Nordisk, which makes semaglutide, is also looking at the Indian market, and there could be many more players once certain patents expire in early 2026. Now, as prices potentially adjust and more choices start to appear, it is very clear that many Indians will want to try these drugs, especially those who have already been importing them from abroad. So to understand what's exactly happening in this space and what it really means for someone like you or me, let's first understand how it all started everywhere else, because India is actually getting these drugs a little later than the other countries have done. See, around the world, GLP-1 medicines have been a bit of a big deal for a while now, and their story is quite surprising. GLP-1, for your very quick context, is a natural hormone in our bodies that signals the digestive systems to lower blood sugar. Now, for people with diabetes who basically have some trouble managing their blood sugar levels, this is extremely valuable. The only problem was that GLP-1 breaks down too quickly to be turned into a drug. But then in the 1980s, researchers made a very unexpected discovery. The venom of a reptile called Gila monster contained a substance similar to GLP-1, except that it did not break down so quickly. Scientists began experimenting with that to develop what they saw as a near perfect diabetes medicine. So when Novo Nordisk created semaglutide, the main role was supposed to help people control their blood sugar. But the thing is, they also noticed an interesting side effect to this. People who took GLP-1 medicines started losing weight quite rapidly. Now at first, researchers started wondering if it changed the speed of digestion, but further investigation suggested that these drugs actually act on the brain. Basically, they seem to reduce the craving that makes people reach for snacks and junk food. Many users of the drug said that the constant urge to eat something tasty, which is also sometimes called food noise, just went away completely, and they simply did not feel like binge eating or grazing on unhealthy treats anymore. And that alone was enough to create a massive weight loss industry, because for the first time, it felt like we had a medicine that actually helped people lose weight in a straightforward way without actually needing a fad diet or exhausting workout plans. But the story actually gets even stranger from here. See, as people began taking these medicines, doctors and patients started noticing other changes as well. It turns out that these drugs did not just target food cravings, they also seemed to dampen other harmful urges as well. People reported that it helped them reduce or even quit drinking alcohol or using drugs. Some others felt that they no longer had the drive to smoke. There are also stories that it even helped with behaviors like compulsive shopping. Now, I know, while all of this sounds almost too good to be true, and scientists are still examining the evidence, the underlying idea is that these medicines calm unhealthy cravings in general. It is not that they make you lose all interest in feeling good or having desires, to be honest. They just quiet down the harmful and impulsive part. And because of these potential benefits, GLP-1 medicines are now being tested for a wide range of conditions, including Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease as well. Now, there are also hints that they might lower the risk of some cancers, although those are still quite early in nature. But that said, skeptics warn that a lot of this might actually be hype. In time, some studies may show that the benefits in some of these areas are smaller or are very complicated than they appear now. We also know that these drugs come with side effects like vomiting, diarrhea, mood shifts, and insomnia as well. But still, this discovery that a single class of drug can have such a broad impact on obesity, addiction, and many other health health problems is definitely remarkable, and many people in the medical field feel that it could completely change how we treat these conditions. And when you introduce something so very powerful to millions of people across the world, the thing is, it can lead to noticeable effects across society. In the United States, a significant number of people are already on GLP-1 drugs. One survey suggested that about 1 in 8 Americans had tried them by the middle of last year. By some estimates, these medicines might take up about 10% of all the money that is spent on medication in the US by 2030, which gives us a true sense of how huge they really are. In practical terms, some doctors say that these drugs are bringing more patients in for checkups at an earlier stage. Basically, people who have issues like obesity or weight-related conditions now want a GLP-1 prescription, and in that entire process, other hidden illnesses like sleep apnea or undiagnosed diabetes are also getting caught up. A company that makes CPAP machines for sleep apnea called ResMed saw its sales jump by 11%, and they partly attribute it to this particular trend. Now, since India is known for having a high number of people with diabetes and other chronic conditions tied to weight, the idea of catching these problems sooner could be very, very beneficial in our country as well. At the same time, we see behavioral shift that ripple through the entire economy. In the US, for example, large retailers like Walmart have apparently noticed that people on GLP-1 drugs tend to buy fewer groceries, particularly junk food items. Now, that might sound like a small thing at once, but it shows that when a substantial number of consumers change their eating habits, big businesses start to feel the impact. Food manufacturers are also exploring how to keep these new customers interested, perhaps by reformulating products that feel less tempting to binge on. Now, these are early signs that people on these drugs drink less alcohol and smoke fewer cigarettes, though the data is not yet massive in scale. And if that pattern holds up, it could have profound benefits for public health. It might also transform entire industries from junk food to beverages to even tobacco. But on the flip side, whenever a new and expensive drug is in high demand, scams and questionable practices often start following it. In many places, there is a black market for fake or unapproved GLP-1 medicines. Since clinics and even gyms have jumped onto the trend, offering prescriptions to clients without strict medical oversight. So it is very possible that something similar could happen in India as the demand grows. People might be tempted to look for cheaper alternatives through risky channels, and that can lead to problems with drug safety and regulations. But still, being late to the party sometimes gives you the advantage of learning from everybody else's experiences. Other countries went into this mostly blind-eyed, dealing with the enormous hype and the shortages as well as the confusion about who should be able to get these drugs. But in India, we already know that these prices can fall when the patent expires and more competitors will enter the scene. And the best part is that amidst all of this noise, there could be real transformation in how Indians address obesity, addiction, and some of the most stubborn health challenges out there in the world. Now, of course, nobody can say for sure how big an impact these medicines will have in India. They might stay limited to people who can afford them for sure, and many of the more fantastic hopes might actually prove to be overblown. But on the other hand, there is a possibility that in just a few years, these drugs will become more affordable, more widely available, and might even reshape how we approach both physical and mental health. But either way, wherever this goes, this is definitely a movement that is worth paying attention to, because it has been a long time since a class of drugs has shown the potential to change so many behaviors and treat so many conditions all at the same time. With that, let's move on to the second story of the day. See, in November 2020, the Indian government had launched something called the PLI program under the Atmanirbhar Bharat banner. Now, the goal was to encourage companies in 14 sectors like electronics, pharmaceuticals, steel, etc. to produce goods in India by rewarding them with financial incentives once they hit certain production targets. Now, the government set aside a big sum of nearly 2 lakh crore rupees for this, and there were high hopes that it would lead to a $500 billion worth of manufacturing within 5 years, also create plenty of jobs, and increase manufacturing share of India's GDP to 25% by 2025. Now, a big reason why such a bold push for manufacturing felt urgent lies in an economic concept called structural transformation theory. Now, this idea describes how countries typically evolve from having most people in agriculture to actually becoming strong in manufacturing and then eventually moving into services. Now, this is not just natural progression. Manufacturing has a history of creating jobs in large numbers and boosting overall growth far more strongly than services alone. Research by the Asian Development Bank shows that manufacturing jobs are especially good at sparking more indirect employment compared to service sector jobs. Another study finds out that when the share of manufacturing in GDP rises by even 1%, it can lift growth by around half a percentage point or more in countries that aren't yet wealthy. India, however, mostly skipped the manufacturing stage. We went from agriculture to services, and while that brought some benefits to us, it also left a big gap in job creation and forced us to depend on imports for many of our products. Now, the PLI scheme was meant to fill that very gap. Firms that signed up were required to invest a certain minimum amount, prove that they had raised their sales beyond the baseline level, and then ensure that they were using enough local imports for their production. Now, in exchange, they were promised an incentive payout from the government. Earlier on, many people called this a big game changer for the Indian economy. But the thing is, if you look at the results that have been achieved so far, you will notice that the results are not really what were expected. A recent analysis reported by Reuters says that by October 2024, companies in the PLI program had produced only about $151.93 billion worth of goods, which was barely 37% of the government's own targets. On top of that, of all the money that the government had set aside, only about $1.73 billion had actually been paid out in incentives, which works out to less than 8% of the allocated total. And this mismatch in expectations is not just limited to output or money alone. Some companies say that they cannot meet the very high production goals. Some others complain that government departments have taken way too long to decide which businesses qualify and too long to release the incentive funds. Meanwhile, the manufacturing sector's share in India's economy has actually dipped from 14.1% to 12.9% since the scheme began, which is the exact opposite of what was intended, to be honest. But that said, there are also some successes. Electronics manufacturing, especially mobile phones, has done very well, with the total value of phones produced in India surging by 63% to $49 billion in the 2023-2024 period. Apple even started making its latest iPhones in our country, which is something that was almost unthinkable just a few years ago. Pharmaceuticals are one more success story here because exports have nearly doubled over the past decade to around $28 billion. And these achievements basically seem to show that PLI can work under the right circumstances. But they also highlight how limited the success has been outside these two main areas. Out of the 14 sectors originally chosen for PLI, most are lagging behind. In the solar industry, for example, government data suggests that 8 out of 12 firms are on course to miss their PLI targets, including big names like Reliance, Adani, and JSW. In steel, 14 out of the 58 approved projects have been dropped because they failed to show enough progress. Delays in finalizing participants or paying incentives have also severely slowed projects in high-cost fields like semiconductors and advanced battery technology. One more issue here is that the scheme's rules can feel very complicated. See, companies face strict requirements on how much extra they produce every year and how much local content they can use. They also have to prove these milestones step by step to government authorities. And this paperwork can be very difficult to navigate for some businesses, so it becomes easier to give up or even scale back. Meanwhile, there was once a talk about extending the PLI scheme to even more industries, but that plan seems to have fizzled out now. Government officials have hinted that they do not see any reason to extend a program that most participants have not fully lived up to. As a result, a large part of the funds might actually remain untouched for a very long time. So the future of the PLI scheme in many ways suddenly feels uncertain. India still needs a stronger manufacturing base for sure to create jobs and to reduce our dependence on imports, and many people still believe that some version of PLI could be the answer. Because after all, it definitely has worked well in a couple of places for our country. Yet the overall numbers paint a very sobering picture here. Perhaps the targets were set too high, or maybe the rules were too strict, or maybe the funds were promised in ways that made companies expect quicker payouts than they actually got. But whatever the reasons may be, most PLI participants have struggled to meet the requirements, which basically means that they are not getting the government's money, and the government in turn is not seeing any surge in manufacturing capacity that it wanted. That brings us to the end of the two stories of the day. With that, let's move on to the final section and talk about the quick news headlines. First, the GST Council is likely to introduce a uniform goods and services tax rate of 5% for all commercial drones, aiming to streamline taxation and reduce industry confusion. Currently, drones used for business purposes without cameras attract a GST rate of 5% under the HSN code 8806, whereas those equipped with cameras fall under HSN code 8525, attracting a higher tax rate of 18%. Second, GHCL Limited announced plans to establish soda ash plant in Gujarat's Kutch region, investing 3,500 crore rupees in the first phase alone. This plant's total production capacity will reach 1.1 million tons, with phase 1 adding 5.5 lakh tons annually. Third and the final one, Bain Capital, which is a prominent US-based private equity firm, has acquired an 18% stake in India's second largest gold financer, Manappuram Finance, for 4,385 crore rupees. This deal was executed at 236 rupees per share, representing a 30% premium over the company's 6-month average trading price. That's all the news and stories I have for you today. This is your host Anurag Bansal signing off. I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and goodbye. Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.